The annual league meetings are underway in Florida. Mike Macdonald and John Schneider both speaking with reporters, offering plenty of insight in the state of the roster, their offseason, and much more. We're going to dish out some thoughts on takeaways from the league meetings coming up next year on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined as always here for our Tuesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're tuning in from Warner Robins, Georgia, or Dunedin, New Zealand. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for listening in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're going to continue our pre-draft series. We're going to go back to the defensive side of the football today, breaking down some linebackers, looking at some depth options for the Seattle Seahawks after re-signing Ernest Jones to go with Tyrese Knight. And we got some takeaways from Mike Macdonald and John Schneider, their media availability at the annual league meetings in Palm Beach, Florida. Jam-packed episode coming your way courtesy of FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As they do each and every year, the Seahawks general manager John Schneider and coach Mike Macdonald descended on Palm Beach, Florida for the NFL annual meetings. And there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes at these meetings that reporters are not privy to, but you do get the opportunity to speak with John Schneider and Mike Macdonald, scrum it up a bit with those two. And of course, there's plenty of interesting tidbits coming out of there. Unfortunately, I did not get to go this year. I normally go, and I was supposed to go. We had some things that came up that prevented me from flying down there. But nonetheless, Rob, there's plenty of stuff that's been coming out in regard to Macdonald's comments, what John Schneider had to say. And I'm curious what jumped out to you coming out of these league meetings.
Well, I thought it was fascinating that Mike Macdonald, John Schneider in unison basically said, here's our plans for number 18 overall. You know, I jest. I mean, that's the thing, Corbin. It's one of the reasons why I haven't made the trip all the way down to Florida. It's like, it sounds like a wonderful vacation at the late stages of March and early April for those of you who are kind of sick of the rain and things like that in the Seattle area. To me, the most fascinating kind of takeaway was just the fact that Mike Macdonald just today acknowledged the fact that he is eager for Seattle to continue to have those joint practices. I was really excited a year ago when the Seahawks had a joint practice with the Tennessee Titans and basically got themselves a fourth preseason game. That, of course, was something that Pete Carroll had never allowed the Seahawks to do in the past. He kind of wanted to keep things behind closed doors, so to speak. But Mike Macdonald suggested that he wanted to have joint practices in preparation for preseason games both on the road, where Seattle is going to have one preseason game on the road this season, and then two preseason games at home. And so, again, that just opens up the possibility that Seattle is going to be able to get pretty physical in a practice setting against other opponents. And so I think that for a team like the Seahawks and under Mike Macdonald, I think that they are getting more physical. This is a chance to flex a little bit and certainly to do some evaluation, because the games themselves in the preseason often are more of a rotation rather than an opportunity to evaluate all the best prospects.
Yeah, that was the first thing that really stood out to me, because, again, this was not something that, and you and I bemoaned it on this podcast plenty of times, wondering why Pete Carroll, for all of his strengths, wondering why he was not willing to go on the road or bring another team in and do joint practices. He never did a single one of those during his entire time in Seattle. Mike Macdonald, they went to Tennessee last year. Now they've got 2 home games. So this provides an opportunity to bring one of those teams in for practices leading up to that game. And listen, you can control the environment. We've talked about the pros and cons with it, but you can control the environment to protect your players, but still get those really good reps that their starters are not going to be getting because they're not going to be playing in the preseason game. Or if they do, it's maybe one series. You can get real bullets flying out on the practice field against top-notch competition. You can do that with more control over the elements when you have joint practices. So Mike Macdonald coming from Baltimore, we know John Harbaugh is a huge advocate of joint practices. Mike Macdonald has followed suit. So don't be surprised if Seattle has not one but two sets of joint practices before preseason games, one home and one away. As far as things that stood out to me, I'm going to mention a rule change that ended up not happening here in a bit. But as far as comments that John Schneider and Mike Macdonald made last couple of days, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but John Schneider basically reiterating the idea that the Seahawks are way ahead of where they were this time last year. And we know Mike Macdonald didn't get to go to the draft or to the combine, didn't get to go to the Senior Bowl last year because he was putting his staff together. This year, he's been involved in that. The offensive coaching staff that comes in, yes, it might be a mostly new coaching staff, but so many of these guys have coached together. Even some of the coaches that were retained from last year's staff have worked with a number of these coaches that were brought in. Just as one example, Clint Kubiak got to coach with Kennedy Palomalu, the running back coach, in Minnesota when he was the offensive coordinator. So those two have ties together. Rick Dennison's been in the league long enough. He's probably coached with everyone that's on every staff, on every team. He's been in the league for a long time. So he's got those relationships. He was on that Minnesota staff with Kennedy Palomalu and Clint Kubiak. We've talked about John Benton and his past relationship with Dennison in Houston when Dennison was the offensive coordinator and he was a line coach. He coached with Kubiak last year. So we can keep going on and on. It shouldn't come as a surprise. The comments coming out from Schneider and Macdonald. Macdonald said it's a little bit unique because of how many guys we've hired that have worked together. So I don't think it's a normal operation when you get a staff together like we had last year on both sides of the ball. A lot of these guys have worked together. They speak the same language. It's been a really fun process. And I like the part about speaking the same language because I can tell you this, and you can say this as a teacher, Rob, when you are able to get your students to buy into your language and the way that you do things, it's a lot easier to be able to instruct. The same thing goes when you are coaching players, whether it's Pee-wee leaguers or in the NFL. There's obviously stark differences there. But the idea of teaching and getting people to buy in is the same at all those levels. And having a staff where everybody already speaks that language together, I think is incredibly essential to succeed in the NFL. Pete Carroll was a master at doing that. But I think in this case, getting all these offensive assistants that have already worked together on the same staff, and you've got almost 80 years of experience with this coaching staff now on the offensive side of the ball, and they speak that same lingo, it is going to make that process transitioning to a new offense much more seamless.
Yeah, and then that was one of the reasons why I thought that the Seahawks fans should not be alarmed if Seattle was unable or unwilling to bring in a whole bunch of free agent offensive linemen. It's just because I think that there is a belief in the Virginia Mason Athletic Center that just the more experienced coaching staff is going to be able to coax a little bit more talent, a little bit more production out of Seattle's offensive line in particular. So again, the fact that that both John Schneider and Mike Macdonald acknowledged as much, using the same language, so to speak, I do think that kind of tracks with what we have actually seen in terms of free agency. And speaking of free agency, that was one of the other things I thought was a little bit interesting. John Schneider talked about this couple of days ago, and then this rule actually passed in the NFL today, is that just the idea of allowing teams to have direct contact with free agents and set up travel during that negotiation window. I mean, there was a lot of fans out there, a lot of media reporters out there who were just basically waiting to see Seattle sign some of these big ticket free agent players. But at the same time, when you consider the fact that Seattle's, of course, on the West Coast and everything is happening on the East Coast, then it's a little bit more difficult when the majority of the teams, the majority of the players are operating on that East Coast clock. So it allows teams a little bit more I would say just equality when it comes to actually communicating with players and agents during that so-called tampering period. So this is something that John Schneider kind of pushed for. The Minnesota Vikings and the Pittsburgh Steelers were one of the teams that actually sponsored this idea. It did pass, and it is something that I think that the Seahawks are going to ultimately, and not only the Seahawks, but any West Coast team, frankly, is going to wind up becoming winners because of this ruling today.
Yeah, I'm going to close out this segment with, I mentioned the rule changes. You mentioned one that passed, one that didn't. The tush push has not been banned. And listen, I was on the side that this should not be removed, because to me, the teams that are complaining about this, they keep pointing out safety. And look, if that play's not safe, there are so many other football plays that are not safe. I think it boils down to there's just a lot of teams that are bitter that they can't stop the Philadelphia Eagles, because there are other teams that have tried to run tush push plays in short yard situations, and they've gotten stonewalled. Philadelphia has just been better than everybody else at that. And I don't think you should take away a play because there's a competitive disadvantage that the entire rest of the league, they just aren't able to stop it. Figure it out. And I love the fact that Mike Macdonald called it a good play today, and he was clearly one of them on the side. Well, we're not going to remove that. We need to learn how to stop it. And so I was excited, at least for now. It sounds like they're going to revisit this next year. I just don't like it. Keep it in there. It's a football play. Figure out how to stop it. When we come back, maybe part of stopping that boils down to your linebackers and how quickly to get to the line of scrimmage. We're going to be diving into this year's linebacker class for the 2025 NFL Draft. We'll be starting with first rounders and day 2 selections. That'll be coming up next year on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I just realized how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I can budget smarter and save a bit more money each month. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com. for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Morang. Hey, special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for listening in, and thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. When we went into the offseason, it was unclear whether the Seahawks were going to be able to re-sign Ernest Jones. That, luckily, was not an issue. John Schneider getting the deal done a couple days before free agency started. So, unlike this time last year, where even when Seattle had signed a couple veterans, Rob, Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, they were on one-year deals, and obviously neither one of those played out the way the Seahawks hoped that it would. Now you've got Ernest Jones locked up for the next 3 years. You've got Tyrese Knight on his rookie contract for those same 3 years. You feel pretty darn good about the starters, the foundation you've got in the middle of your defense. So from a starter standpoint, it doesn't seem like the Seahawks are going to be prioritizing the linebacker position, but this is not a class that has a ton of elite talent, no elite talents really for off-ball linebackers. It does seem like it's setting up to be a class where maybe Seattle, as early as day 2, could start looking at some depth pieces that could play situational role for the Seahawks and maybe even push Tyrese Knight on defense.
Well, and that's one of the things that I'll kind of push back on you here just for a moment, because I really believe that Jalen Walker from Georgia, I know that he played a little bit of the edge rusher role. I do believe that he is an elite talent. I think that he's a future Pro Bowler. He is a guy that was able to rush off the edge and, again, be kind of the stand-up inside linebacker as well. 6'1", 240 pounds. He's got size. He's got instincts. He's got straight line speed. When you watch the tape on him, he is a guy that projects very well to the NFL. Now, I said the word project or projects because he is a little bit of a project, again, because he rushed upfield as many times as he did. But at the same time, I really do believe that a guy that can blitz the way that he can, if he was somehow available to Seattle at number 18 overall, then to me, he would absolutely qualify as one of those best available players that the Seahawks would have to consider. But as you say, Corbin, inside linebacker feels like essentially, a position that Seahawks fans should not be paying much attention to. I'll say that because a year ago, I thought the cornerback was the exact same spot. And then, of course, the Seahawks went and drafted Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James. And, I was kind of struggling a little bit just to be able to kind of articulate the strengths of those two players because I just did not focus much on cornerbacks. So just knowing the way that Mike Macdonald focuses in on linebackers, I think that it is important that we kind of break down some of these players. Again, my favorite inside linebacker in this draft class is Jalen Walker. I think that he is going to be off the board before Seattle is selecting at number 18 overall. I think another interesting prospect is Jihad Campbell from Alabama. He is not the same caliber of player, in my opinion, as Jalen Walker, but he does have remarkable athletic ability, 235 pounds, and still ran a 4.52 in the 40-yard dash. And you watch that on tape, and his coverage ability is, in my opinion, an upgrade over what Ernest Jones Jr. and Tyrese Knight provide the Seahawks. Now, again, he is not a player that I think that the Seahawks should select, but at the same time, I do believe that his athletic ability, his ability in coverage is the kind of stuff that might wind up getting him selected in the first round as well.
What I'm intrigued about with Campbell is the possibility of him being a 3-4 outside linebacker, not an off-ball linebacker, because I think he's got enough size. And you mentioned how fluid he is dropping into coverage. Mike Macdonald loves to do that with his edge defenders. And I remember him multiple times last year talking about how important that was for his edge guys, the outside linebackers, to be able to drop back. Campbell would be a natural at doing that. But you wouldn't have to worry about the issues that he has as a middle linebacker diagnosing run plays. If you're just saying, hey, you're off the edge, you set the firm edge. I think this kid could do it. I think he could rush the passer at a very high level. He's been an effective blitzer at Alabama, and they've used him some off the edge. Not a ton, but there is enough tape out there to really ramp up that intrigue with this kid. He is now coming off of a surgery, so that may potentially make it that he drops a little bit in the draft, but you're talking about a really athletic kid that's got pass rushing upside, and there will probably be a few teams that think that they can fix the diagnosing, the run issues that he has as an off-ball linebacker. But I view him more as a hybrid edge in today's NFL. As far as day two prospects, this is where I think you start to get into some players that potentially Seattle could have some interest in. And me in particular, there's two players that I'm fascinated by that could be second or third round picks. And I want to start with Demetrius Knight from South Carolina, because this guy is a big linebacker. We're talking 240 plus pounds. He's tall. He had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. And what a route that he has had, going through 3 programs in college. And really his first 3 college seasons didn't have much productivity, and then ends up at Charlotte for a year and then transfers to South Carolina to play in the SEC of all places. And he was one of the best linebackers in the entire conference. The guy is a ball hawk when it comes to getting downhill, flying downhill. We talked about the instinct issues, diagnose issues that Jihad Campbell has. You don't see that on film with Demetrius Knight. You see a guy that comes down and he makes plays against the run game. He is a good enough athlete to be able to go sideline to sideline. Not the best athlete in this class, but his instincts make up for whatever deficiencies he may have. Not the natural cover guy that a few of these other players we're going to be talking about, but in terms of an inside linebacker, off-ball linebacker that can blitz, that can make plays in the run game, and has enough athleticism to develop some in coverage, Knight is a player that I could see getting selected because of his high football IQ in the second or third round in this draft.
Yeah, his size, physicality, are very intriguing. He is one of those players, as you mentioned. I mean, he's been well traveled. I mean, originally began his career at Georgia Tech, then moved to Charlotte, then moved to South Carolina. That to me would be a reason just in itself to bring in Demetrius Knight and to have that conversation, try to get a little bit of the behind the scenes kind of a conversation with him. I'm going to lead off with a player in Carson Schwarzenegger from UCLA that also has a similar kind of a road to the NFL, and he didn't transfer, but he was a walk-on at UCLA, and there are some who believe that Carson Schwarzenegger is going to wind up being a first-round selection. He was terrific for the UCLA Bruins this season. If you're going to talk about guys that were breakout players, and Schwarzenegger is absolutely one of those guys. As I mentioned previously, a walk-on, didn't become a full-time starter like Demetrius Knight until late in his career. But at the same time, you just see those Jedi-like instincts. He can close his eyes and find the football. And he is one of those guys that not only can close the line of scrimmage, but also can drop back into coverage. Again, he is one of those kind of late arriving players that I think the NFL teams get excited about. And I would not be surprised at all if both of these players wind up being off the board before Seattle is selecting in the second round. And again, because this is not a huge position of concern, I think you're looking for depth rather than starters at this point. I don't think that these are players that are likely to become Seattle Seahawks, but at the same time, I do think that they are terrific players who project as NFL starters. And so the one other player that I would mention of this group would be Barrett Carter from Clemson. He is kind of the exact opposite of the two guys we were talking about. He signed with Clemson as a 5-star recruit. He basically has started since he joined the team. I mean, he has been incredibly productive. He was a 3-time All-ACC player. He's instinctive. He's physical. He's just a little bit short and stubby. 6 foot, 231 pounds. And so to me, he is one of those guys that you might be able to draft, say, in the 3rd round, that I think is going to wind up outproducing some of the players that were selected ahead of him, at least early in his NFL career.
I'm going to throw Danny Stutzman into discussion out of Oklahoma here on day 2. And there's a possibility he doesn't go till day 3. He's probably a mid to late 3rd rounder, early 4th rounder, because there have been some durability questions. He has missed some games in his time at Oklahoma. But you want to talk about a guy that plays like his hair is on fire. And sometimes he pays for it. Sometimes his aggressiveness, he can get a little bit too aggressive in terms of shooting gaps when he didn't make the right diagnosis, or he over pursues things sometimes. But man, you can't teach the effort that this guy plays with. You could tell that his teammates gravitated to him. So he's got that moxie you're looking for at the linebacker spot. And he put on a show at the combine, arguably the most explosive athlete among all the linebackers there. He's got good size, not elite size, but good size for today's NFL. He'll come down and he'll hit you. Again, he's a very aggressive player. Mike Macdonald likes guys like that. I think he could come in and play special teams right away in the NFL and could probably start for a handful of teams. But that would be a guy, if he sneaks into day 3, that I could see Mike Macdonald having a hard time not going after from a depth perspective. I think he's going to go on day 2, though, because he's a playmaker, and I think there's still a lot of untapped potential there coming out of Oklahoma. When we return, we've got day 3 prospects. Seattle, that may be the sweet spot for them if they're looking for linebacker depth. There's plenty of talent on day 3. We're going to be looking at several of those prospects coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use in everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. There might not be a Cinderella anymore with all the number 1 seeds advancing, but FanDuel makes it easy to back those top seeds with spreads, totals, and game props. With the tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use. When I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com today and get into the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s that are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's all about linebackers today. And yes, the Seahawks are in good shape, really good shape compared to a year ago, with Ernest Jones being re-signed, the revelation that was Tyrese Knight, and the excitement about his continued development. But there is still a need to add from a depth perspective to this linebacking core, especially for a coach like Mike Macdonald that clearly values that position. And while this is not a super deep linebacker group and it doesn't have a lot of top-tier talent, there certainly are some day three players that are worth discussing here. And Rob, I know that there's a couple guys that you are very excited about that you think are going to be available on day three that could be much more viable options for the Seahawks with 5 selections in the last 4 rounds.
Yeah, and a couple of them are relatively local products. I mean, for one, I'm just going to start off the conversation with Washington's Mark Bruner. He was the only player from the Huskies who was invited to the Combine this past year. And, he had a terrific showing there. I mean, the perception is that Carson Bruner, the son of Mark Bruner, who was a first-round selection as a tight end at the University of Washington to the Pittsburgh Steelers, that Carson Bruner was an instinctive player. He wasn't necessarily a great athlete. Then he runs a 4.58 at 228 pounds. He has a 9'11" broad jump. His 6.84 3-cone that I watched by my own eyes at the University of Washington Pro Day, Corbin, that's almost 0.2 of a second faster than any of the inside linebackers who tested at the Combine. So he not only is pretty stout, as he proved on the field, but he also can move to the outside, can run to the sideline is what I mean by moving to the outside, and he can change directions pretty fluidly as well. So again, a quality football player. Now that said, as much as I like Carson Bruner from the University of Washington, it's actually his rival with for some, the hated Oregon Ducks. Jeffrey Bassa is a player that I think is actually the best fit of all the linebackers in this class for the Seahawks in terms of where you are likely to get him and his positional flexibility and what he might be able to offer Seattle. Because as you said, I mean, Seattle feels like they already have their stud starters in Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight. At the same time, I do think that there are some concerns about coverage ability when you look at all the different tight ends, the running backs, some of the slot receivers that you see in the NFC West. And if you are going to truly make a deep playoff run, then I think that you have to have some guys that can be a little bit of a specialist in coverage. Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon, to me, is that guy. He's 6'1", he's 232 pounds, and he is rocked up at this point after initially joining Oregon as a safety. I mentioned before with the athletic ability that Carson Bruner showed. I mean, what about a 4.63 40 at the Combine, a 38.5-inch vertical jump, again, at the Combine. I went to Oregon's Pro Day, and Jeffrey Bassa, to me, was the guy at the Oregon Pro Day in terms of just, trying to get the rest of his teammates excited. I want those types of intangibles at the inside linebacker position. Jeffrey Bassa, to me, again, is a guy that isn't necessarily a superstar. I think he does have a chance to sneak into the 3rd round. I think he's a terrific football player that a lot of people nationally are kind of forgetting about a little bit. And I think that could work in the favor of a certain team in the NFL. It happens to be in the Pacific Northwest as well.
I want to take a moment. Look, I got a couple guys to talk about here, but I want to talk about an Iowa linebacker. And this might sound like a broken record because it seems like it's every year. I know that plenty of people remember when I was raving about Jack Campbell coming out a few years ago, and then the Lions took him in the 1st round, and he's been a really solid player on their defense since coming into the league. Jay Higgins has been the most productive linebacker in college football the last 2 years. 2 years ago, Rob, this is a number that I have to always do a double take with. He had 171 combined tackles for the Iowa Hawkeyes. This guy is just, it's like there's a magnet inside of him, and he just gets connected to the football. He did not test well, ran in the 4.7s. So teams are going to be looking at him and saying, I don't see the athlete here. But when you turn on the tape, I see a guy with incredible instincts. He's very physical, gets downhill. And oh, by the way, he had 4 interceptions this year. So he isn't just a traditional old school thumper. the guy actually has really good coverage skills. He gets his hands on the football, and he can make plays happen when he gets the ball in his hands. You can see a background. He had to play some offense in high school. The guy can make some plays, had a couple sacks the last few years. You just look at the production, you're wondering why he's not getting more of a look. A lot of it just boils down to the lack of athleticism or the perceptions there. But I think whoever gets Jay Higgins is going to be getting an absolute stud on day 3. I know that testing's not there, but the film shows a guy that absolutely can play in the modern NFL at the next level.
Yeah, he's very, very physical player. And as you mentioned, very instinctive player, whether it be in coming down straight downhill in run support or in dropping back into coverage. Higgins is, again, a guy that I think fits in with a 3-4 alignment. I'll mention a player from Georgia. And, of course, the Georgia Bulldogs are as loaded with talent as just about anybody. They had 14 players invited to the Combine. Smile Munden. 6'2", 224 pounds. So he is almost the exact same size as Anthony Higgins that you just mentioned from Iowa. At the same time, we were talking about a whole different level of athlete, whereas Higgins was timed in the high 4.7s, low 4.8. Smile Munden, even with an injured foot, what was tested at a 4.58 seconds in the 40-yard dash, and his 10-foot 10-inch broad jump was easily the best of this year's linebacker class. And it's a number that, ranks with the corners, the safeties, the wide receivers. I'm just an explosive athlete. At the same time, he's got a foot injury. And so he is one of those players that NFL teams are going to have to vet a little bit. I mentioned Demetrius Knight before from South Carolina. You want to know why he wound up at 3 different teams. You want to know that Smile Munden is actually healthy before you are going to be investing that 4th or 5th round selection that you likely are going to have to use if you want to bring a player of his caliber into the fold. But at the same time, again, in terms of explosive athletes, Smile Munden right there with Jeffrey Bassa, Carson Bruner, to me, those are the 3 day 3 linebackers that I really think could be plug and play kind of candidates to help the Seahawks, not only on defense, but on special teams as well.
Let's talk sleepers, and we're going to be digging deep on a few of these guys, but then there's going to be a name here, Cody Lindenberg from Minnesota, who, to be honest, I think in terms of playmaking ability, you could make some arguments for him to be a day 2 guy because he's extremely instinctive. He makes plays sideline to sideline. There's blitzing ability. He's made major strides in coverage and still feels like he's somewhat a ball of clay, even though he's played quite a few snaps. He had some injuries early in his career. The durability is something teams are going to be looking at as well. But Lindenberg is one of my guys. I really like the way that he plays the game. I think he's going to be a really good special teams player in the NFL, but I think that there is definitely a long-term starter in there as well. The biggest issue he's had has been missed tackles, and I feel like that's an area that can be cleaned up. But I just love the playmaking and the instincts. He looks like a guy that could play in a 3-4 or a 4-3. So you've got some positional versatility or scheme flexibility there. And Jamon Dumas-Johnson is the other player I'm going to mention here from Kentucky. Previously was at another SEC school. You were mentioning Georgia linebackers. Got another guy here that has played for Georgia previously. But you want to talk about a player that is built like a brick. You just look at the picture. Those of you that are watching on YouTube can see it, but if you're just listening to the audio, look up a picture of this guy. He has got legs wider than a redwood tree. Like, this guy is thick for a linebacker. He's got movement skills. He's not the most athletic guy you're going to find, but he returned a fumble for a touchdown this past season. He is a guy that will get downhill and thump people. He's got some of that old school linebacker to his game. And Kentucky, they've got a history of kicking out really solid NFL defensive players. I think this could be another player. There's some questions about his coverage skills. He might be a player that has a hard time being on the field for 3 downs, but I think at minimum he's going to give you a really solid special teams player and a guy that you could plug in on run downs that can make some stuff to the line of scrimmage. There's value there.
Yeah, I wish I could just kind of copy and paste the comments that you just made with Dumas Johnson and apply them to Kobe King, because they are essentially the same kind of a player in that they are very, very effective in terms of run support they also can be targeted a little bit in terms of pass protection. Now, again, as I mentioned before, I think that the Seahawks should be looking at this inside linebacker class and perhaps looking for some specialists. And I mentioned before about the possibility of finding some guys who can be coverage specialists. But as we talked about in the first segment with the Philadelphia Eagles and their tush push, being okayed essentially for the NFL for the 2025 season, then I think that there might be a need to find some of those, old school Levon Kirkland type of linebackers, these guys who are just massive and can attack downhill. Kobe King and Jamon Dumas-Johnson both can play that role.
Yeah, I think that these guys are certainly the type of players that on day 3 you're looking at that have that specialist capability. Jack Kaiser from Notre Dame is another player that is undersized, questions about his athleticism, but all he does is just go out and make plays. And if you're looking for somebody that is going to be able to come in and be a core special teamer right away and might be able to get on the field for you on defense, to me, there's limitations in terms of size and athletic ability, but he's a really sound tackler, very smart guy in the middle of the defense. I could see him being somebody late on day 3 that the Seahawks maybe have some interest in if they want to add depth to the linebacker position. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, our listeners are going to be really excited about this. We're going to start talking offensive linemen. We are going to go to the guard position, the vaunted guard position that everybody thinks the Seahawks need to upgrade. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into that draft class. Make sure that you listen in. Thanks for tuning into tonight's episode. Go Hawks.